Good morning. Welcome to another edition of World History for Ordinary People. And this is going to be number 7 of that series. I did number 6, obviously, just before this one, not just a few days back, but I didn't post it yet. So there should only be World History for Ordinary People number 5 and its predecessors up on Bluebird Semaphore. But this morning we are going to go back to the Reformation with a few words on Poland at the end. So the Reformation, around the early part of the 16th century, in terms of what that means as far as years, somewhere between 1508, 1506, and 1510. Erasmus first, and then Luther both took trips. I don't want to call them pilgrimages because they're really not pilgrimages. They went there on specific purposes to Rome. Erasmus, because some highfalutin type in England asked Erasmus if he'd be kind enough to go with his son and his son's tutor to Rome. Is kind of like to enhance and embellish that time for his son having the likes of a luminary such as Erasmus. Although he wasn't a world-known luminary yet, he was pretty well known, but not the big time that he was going to become. He go to Rome, and Luther went there as a representative of his monastic order, the Augustinians, because they were trying to settle the dispute. They were being divided. On one hand, you had the obscurionists, and the other ones were something recollective, something like that. Two different split. And they wanted to go and get Rome's opinion on this, so they sent Luther. Now, this is going to be all over the place, scattered, but one of the big things I got from reading about this, I understand, and I've commented on it, I don't know if on Bluebird, but to other people anyway, that every time you see these guys, they always have these funny hats on. And they kind of look like berets, but they really don't, because they're puffier, much puffier. And yet, that's what I did find out was that after Luther comes back to Germany, a number of events, and finally he becomes, he earns the title Doctor of Theology, and with that ceremony he gets, amongst other things, he gets to wear the beret, which indicates he's a Doctor of Theology. So that's where that comes from. But just every picture you see these guys, they got that beret on. And the spelling of the word quite struck me as odd when you look at it. I don't know if that's a special way of spelling that type of beret, if that's the way you spell it, all the berets. But I'm getting way off the track. So Erasmus goes, he went first, a couple of years maybe ahead of Luther. And he goes in luxury. He goes in a wonderful stage and stays at wonderful inns, and he comes to Rome and he gets to meet all the big guys and go to all the palaces, and he's just having the time of his life because he loves that stuff. That's what he lives for. He lives for intellectual pursuits and to being around what we would call the intelligentsia, the people who live these very intellectual lives. Although at the time they would have been referred to as humanists, not intellectuals. And one of the things he does while he's there, he becomes aware that the most famous publishing house in the world at the time was in Venice, and he went over there and hung out there for quite some time. The owner or the publisher of that publishing house, I want to say that it's on that famous Rialto Street, which is really a bridge over some canal, and they had a lot of shops there, very famous. But I want to think that that's where the publishing house was. And Erasmus would go there, and first he was hanging there and meeting all the other luminaries that would come in there. And there were so many that would come in here, it actually annoyed the publisher to some extent, because they were interfering with his daily tasks, things he had to do. But eventually, he gives Erasmus a little nook in that publishing house, and then Erasmus, because he's so brilliant, the guy gives him this special dispensation to hang in his place, whereas most people, he wants them to come in and get out. But he's there, and he's there for a purpose. He's trying to translate or read as much as he can of some very hard to come across book. And he's doing that, and he does that for a while, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, back in England, the current Henry, which was Henry VII, he gets up and dies, so they need a successor. Now, Henry's son Arthur had predeceased him, so Henry VIII was to succeed to the crown or the throne. Anyway, and Henry VIII was somebody that Erasmus had already come in contact with. Erasmus thought highly of the youth. Now, his ascending the throne, he was 17. He was a very young man, but by that time he was already fairly accomplished in his studies, his learning, his attributes. And we get this rosy picture painted of Henry VIII at 17. And, you know, with that rosy picture in mind, you wonder, how did he turn out to be this guy who later on in life, you know, comes off as a really detestable person? But who knows what happens in the hearts and minds of man. And pardon me, I'm drinking coffee this morning because I got up a little late and I'm trying to catch up. Okay. And so Erasmus is going to hurry back to England to be in that light of the new king of England, you know, and the people are so joyous. They're going to have this wonderful, brilliant luminary to be their king. They're thrilled. And I always have to wonder why people love it so much to be, you know, somehow have a sovereign over them, you know, my king, my lord, you know, they love it. They just love it. Look at the adulation for the current sovereigns. Queen Elizabeth, who's not a bad person, nice lady, nice enough lady, and the adulation that came out for Diane when the terrible things happened to her. So people love that stuff, and what are you going to do? Listen, their lives aren't all that filled with pomp and circumstance like others. So let them have their joy of being overwhelmed with love for their sovereigns, as they were for Henry VIII. I think that's about all I'm going to say about Erasmus at this time, other than you could see the conflict growing between him and Luther, because they were definitely going in two different directions. So, but anyway, Luther goes to Rome, and he, unlike Erasmus, going in all sorts of luxury and riding special stagecoaches and private coaches, and we're talking about 850 miles. You got to go through the Alps to get from Germany to Rome, Italy, Rome, whatever. Really wasn't Italy yet by that time, but he goes and he's he has kind of this is Luther now. He's kind of has a very religious experience moving into Rome, coming into it. He's looking around and he's saying, "Oh, this is where Paul, the Saint Paul, this is where Peter, this is where, etc. This is where all the blood of all the holy martyrs. Oh, this is And there were a lot of martyrs back in the day. Well, you read the history of the saints, certainly first 300, 400 years of that religion, the Christian religion, just martyr after martyr after martyr. It was like if you became a Christian, you were signing your own death warrant. That's what we would say today. But he goes there and he has certain joyous experiences there, like when he does. There's a tour. They were doing tours back then, by the way. You could sign up for a tour, and one of the tours was you had to hit these 7 or 8 holy places in one day, rushing from one to the other. It's very, very tiring, but he does it, and that was one of his joyous experiences. But he also has a lot of negative comments about Rome, because Rome was a city of quite a lot of the ills of society were in there, and also saw a lot of the money changing hands for buying positions in the for the close to and surrounding the Vatican, and he saw the pretty much buying of offices, this and that. There was a lot of things that that he found to be spiritually repulsive, and he couldn't take too much of that, Luther, without going a little bit awry. Actually, the word is not awry. And so his trip there is not all that long, and I don't know if he gets called back to Germany from his superiors or what, but within I don't know a year or two, he's going back to Germany, and once again he's got to walk this trip. They had to do it very austere. That was their monastic orders, austerity. So they walked. They didn't say that. When he went there, he walked. There's a pass through the Alps that they were able to take, and same thing going back. And he goes back after this very arduous journey, of course. They have very minimal footwear, and traipsing through the snow and the ice. You can just imagine that. But he makes it. He's a tough hombre. There's no doubt about it. Luther's a tough hombre. And whoever was accompanying him was tough also. Pardon me with the coffee here. Gets me talking more, so you're benefiting it as well. So he gets back, and his monastic order is in the town. I'm going to slaughter the pronunciation. Erfurt, something like that. Erfurt. E-R-F or H-U-R-T. Small town. And I believe that's pretty much where his earlier days were. And that's where the Augustinians had a monastery where he was ensconced in. He was being, by that time, he was being a professor in the college there, and he was probably, I'm trying to make a stab at this, he was probably teaching things like perhaps Greek and perhaps some Latin and some philosophy, okay? But in the meantime, going on coincidentally in parallel with all this is the town of Wittenberg needed another professor, and this was another Augustine monastery, not monastery, but the college. It was a fairly newly created college, and we'll get to that, in Wittenberg, and I'm pretty sure the Augustinian order was the the clerical organization leading that one. And so they talk about it and they think, okay, Luther's an ideal candidate. We'll send him to Wittenberg. So he goes to Wittenberg. First of all, he's a little dismayed because it's so small, only 2,000 people. And just something's going through my mind. It's pretty funny. It seems that in the college, there was a library on maybe the second floor, and it was attached directly to the brewery. So I guess you could study for the afternoon, and then when you're done, you could walk over and get a brew. Kind of like all these microbreweries we have today. Now, being a brewer in that industry was large in Europe, you know. So I don't want to go overboard and say, but it's probably one of the more common businesses that would be set up in any of these towns was the brewery. So, but we're getting off track here. So, what happened that in the last 10 years of Luther going there, that this college was created and that somebody saw a need for it? Well, what happened is that in Saxony, and I want to say in German proper, all of it, there were two brothers, noblemen, and one, Frederick II, and they split this large kingdom up into two sections. One of them received the more valuable economic piece, and the other piece was given to Frederick II, which wasn't all that valuable land-wise. But what it was is that ruler was able to participate in the election of the next Holy Roman Emperor, when and if there should be one. And so that guy gets the term elector. So he's the elector of Saxony. This is Frederick II. Now, I have to admit that my whole life, I come across people who are electors of this and elector of that. And I never put it together that they were electing somebody. I just said, you know, they have all these strange names for all these uppity up types and what have you. But that's where that comes from. That guy gets to vote for the Holy Roman Emperor. How democratic. I think you gotta love these people. Anyway, he was a little eccentric, Frederick II. He loved his studies, he loved art, he was a patron, and this kind of thing. And he wasn't too much about the conducting warfare. He probably didn't have any wars during his whole reign. But you know, he saw a need. He wanted to be at least as good as some of the other towns and regions that had a university where the elite would come and study, and he wanted to build that up for his own kingdom. And it's not really a kingdom, but I got to call it his own realm, okay? And so he decides to build a university in Wittenberg, and that's where eventually Luther winds up, and of course the rest is history. But he's there. Luther's definitely there, and he's teaching. And they decide, I think while he was there, to give him the ability to study. I'm very sure of this, to study for a doctorate in theology. And so in time, and it didn't take too long, maybe a year or so, and he gets that title, and that's where we get the beret. But I think going into this these recent look into the Reformation, I came across a picture. First, I became aware that, oh yeah, another reason why Luther got put off with Rome was he was there at the very moment that they were starting to tear down the old St. Peter's and build a new. And the new was going to be extremely opulent and just magnificent. And he was put off by that, you know. Anytime any show of ostentation put off Martin Luther. For what reason, who knows? Maybe it's because he came from humble background and he didn't like that. So, but I'm reading about that, and I'm looking. I get on the internet, the web, whatever you want to call it, and the pictures of St. Peter's today are just. This is so grandiose. You can't believe it. I mean, I can't. I mean, good, God-fearing Christians, they go there. They don't even have to be Christians. Almost any faith, they go there, and they just are amazed by the opulence of St. Peter's. And lo and behold, you know, I just stumbled across. Well, the fact is that the original St. Peter's was built in the late 4th century by Emperor Constantine, however you want to pronounce it. And so that struck me as, you know, something that I kind of vaguely thought I knew and perhaps never had put two and two together, that the St. Peter's we're looking at today is not the St. Peter's of the original St. Peter's in the late 4th century. And it's not only is it not that, I mean, if that ever crossed my mind, I would have said, well, they built over the old one, and the old one is still kind of there. And they demolished that one, but this is a roundabout way of me saying that I was able to come up with an etching of St. Peter's and the buildings and structures around it, the old St. Peter's, an etching. And I was first struck by how aesthetically pleasing it was. It just seemed like an orderly grouping of buildings and plantings, a little plaza here, a little plaza there, an avenue. And lo and behold, in the description below this engraving, they say, and the obelisk is over to the left. And I'm saying, the obelisk, okay. And I look and I see a very smallish looking needle obelisk. And it says it's the same one that's there today. Now, so then things started making sense. The big square plaza in front of St. Peter's Basilica today has that obelisk in the middle of it. It's the very same one that was installed in the original St. Peter's. But what's really fascinating is that that thing came from Egypt. And in Egypt, obelisks were places where they believed they not everyone, I'm sure, but they believe that that's where the great god, 2700 BC or something like that, Amon, from there he was talking to the gods in the heavens and so on and so forth. So here's this ancient Egyptian theology, you know, represented by an obelisk, taking a somewhat roundabout trip to Rome. First it was installed in Alexandria, and I would say like in the 20, 25, 30 BC time frame. Come around 20 or 30 AD, the current emperor of the Roman civilization, Emperor of Rome, was Caligula, and he had that obelisk brought back to Rome, and I think he used it for his own personal grandizement for his own personal use. But eventually, when Constantine had his basilica built, St. Peter's, in the late 4th century, and I don't know how long it took to build that thing, but he put the obelisk in St. Peter's. So today, when the Pope is talking out from his balcony and the cheering masses are down in the plaza, they're all around this, Egyptian theology symbol, and I wonder if it strikes home. It probably does. At least there must be some way of recognizing that fact while you're there in Rome. But once again, a little tidbit of history that I'm hoping people who listen to these talks on world history for ordinary people find fascinating, like I do, and enjoy hearing about it. Now, one quick word on Poland is that Poland, we don't really know this, but Poland has so many famous people, but for various reasons, and we'll continue to talk about why, they don't get publicized that much. But there's one musician who, during her life, became the master performer on the harpsichord, and she's Polish extraction. She was born in 1879 in Warsaw, which puts her, when I'm reading about Poland, pretty much towards the latter part of what I'm reading about, but it's still going on. The partitioning of Poland and the Polish having their internal revolutions and this, that, and the other things, and Poland also going out to other countries trying to help with their revolutions. A lot of things going on, but we don't truly hear about it. I think that it's deemed, we don't really need to know about what's going on in Poland and the Ukraine and all that stuff. We don't need it for the lives we're going to live in the West. So anyway, Poland, of course, being part of the West, but we need to know about England and France, and so on. Anyway, so this lady, you may know her, Wanda Landowski, and interestingly enough, you see that she's playing the piano, and she does some Mozart pieces. Very lovely. Yeah, these are Mozart sonatas. And this next one I'll show you. This actually is a picture of her, Wanda Landowski. And on this one, she's playing the harpsichord. This is different, and she's going to play the Well-Tempered Clavier. Well, she's going to play Bach's The Well-Tempered Clavier. And it's once again, it's lovely. Then I have this one that she also recorded. You recognize that dude, right? That's Bach, the master himself. And she plays the harpsichord on this. Also, unfortunately for me, my good buddy Greg, who I lent one of my record players to, still has it, and that was the only one that could play 78s. That's a group of 78s. Wanda, like I said, was born in Warsaw, 1879. She died in Connecticut. She lived, I guess, maybe the last 20 or 30 years of her life. She died there. And she was, besides being a performer, a concert artist, she was a teacher. And she was the type of teacher that the students adored, loved. She was the greatest person in their lives. And she was a lady of not great stature. She was 5 feet tall. You could just imagine her trying to attack the harpsichord, which is a fairly large instrument. And so she taught, and she world concerts and so on. And eventually, like all of us, she dies at 80. So she lives this real long life out of Warsaw, around the world and everything. So she actually accumulated those events that were going on in Poland, she knew them part and parcel of her life. And certainly there's more to be discovered and learned by me if I ever get a chance to read into her life, see what I can come up with. But what I think is interesting to note is that her musical training, like so many other people who start out in Poland, the first avenue is to Berlin. Somehow those lines of communication, those lines of education and training were established. And if you were serious and you were in Poland and you wanted your child to succeed and excel, you went somewhere in Berlin where there were great teachers. Now, I read this about Wanda Landowski. Let's see if I got it. And I know I also read that about Arthur Rubinstein, the 20th century fantastic pianist. Also, the first attempts were to put him in Berlin and see how that goes. And it went well for both of them, obviously, as we can see. And I'm going to draw this edition of World History for Ordinary People to a close. Have a good day. Come back and see me for number 7. Thank you.